Evening and welcome to Living Compassion 2. It's really wonderful to have all of you here tonight, especially on a Sunday night right after the clocks have changed. My name is Gloria Cosgrove. I'm the Senior Vice President of the Board of Directors of DNKL, Tibetan Buddhist Center for Universal Peace. And we are delighted to present this inspiring journey into the life of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. Tonight's program of deeply moving music, heartfelt narration, and breathtaking images is a continuation of the first Living Compassion event that we held here 2 years ago at the Ridgefield Playhouse. This year, we're providing more immersive and contemporary look at His Holiness's work, and most important, his call to all of us to live a compassionate life. We will experience the Dalai Lama's escape from Tibet as a young monk, who then grew into fulfilling his destiny to lead all the world to find, explore, and embrace a compassionate way of life. In the words of His Holiness, we are all same as human beings. We all need to take responsibility for creating a better world and more peaceful humanity. If you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. Only the development of compassion and understanding for others can bring us tranquility and happiness in all that we do. This work is a daily practice, however, and I would like to invite you to learn more about DNKL and our offerings by visiting our center in Reading or online by dnkl.org. We offer weekly free meditation classes for beginners, as well as programs designed to instruct and support your quest and understanding of compassion, affording us the tools to find our own path and truly embody His Holiness's teaching and wishes. Now, before I invite our esteemed guests to the stage, I would like to thank all of you again for coming tonight. The team at the Ridgefield Playhouse has been absolutely outstanding throughout this process and 2 years ago. Our many sponsors who are supporting this event, as well as our gold ticket holders, and the wonderful volunteers and generosity of all the performers. Tencho Gatso, the niece of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and Director of Tibetan Empowerment and Chinese Engagement Program for the International Campaign for Tibet. Grammy nominee Nawang Kicho, the world's most renowned Tibetan flutist, and musicians Arthur Lipner and Janet Edley, and other special guests. And now, with a deep inhale and exhale, together we begin our journey of living compassion. Thank you.
Love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, humanity cannot survive.
Only the development of compassion and understanding for others can bring us the tranquility and happiness we all seek.
Compassion is not religious business. It is human business. It is not luxury. It is essential for our own peace and mental stability. It is essential for human survival.
Compassion, love, and forgiveness are not luxuries. They are fundamental for our survival.
Generosity is the most natural outward expression of an inner attitude of compassion and loving kindness.
I have found that the greatest degree of inner tranquility comes from the development of love and compassion. The more we care for the happiness of others, the greater is our sense of well-being. Cultivating a close, warm-hearted feeling for others automatically puts the mind at ease. It is the ultimate source of success in life.
Farmer's son. With the passing of the 13th Dalai Lama, the search began. The search began at once for the reincarnation. For each Dalai Lama is the reincarnation of his predecessor. The first, who was born in the year 1391, was an incarnation of Cheresi, the Buddha of mercy, who made a vow to protect all living beings. In accordance with time-honored customs and traditions, the state oracles were consulted as a first step towards finding out where the reincarnation had appeared. Next, the regent went to the sacred lake Lamulazo, about 90 miles southeast of Lhasa. After several days spent in prayers and meditation, the regent saw the vision of 3 Tibetan letters: A, Ka, and Ma, followed by a picture of a monastery with jade green and gold and a house with turquoise tiles. A detailed description was written down and kept a strict secret. In the following year, high lamas and dignitaries carrying the secrets of the visions were sent out to all parts of Tibet. The wise men who went to the east arrived in our region of Dokam during the winter, and they observed the green and golden roofs of the monastery of Kumbum, and in the village of Daktsir they noticed at once a house with turquoise tiles as described by the regent. Their leader asked if the family living in the house had any children, and was told they had a boy who was nearly 2 years old. I was that boy. I was born in a small village called Daktsir in the northeast of Tibet on the 5th day of the 5th month of the wood hog year of the Tibetan calendar in 1935. Daktsir is in the district called Dokam. Do means lower part of a valley that merges to the plains, and Kam is in the eastern part of Tibet, where the distinctive race of Tibetans called Kampas live. Dokam is the part of Tibet where our mountains begin to descend to the plains of the east towards China. Daktsir itself is about 9,000 feet above the sea. Although the people of Dokam were mostly tall and strong, hardy and brave by nature, those qualities were tempered to gentleness by their faith. Humility and charity, temperance and kindness, affection and consideration for all other beings. These were the virtues encouraged by their beliefs. It was among such amiable people that I was born, and I have always been glad that I come from a humble family of peasants. My father himself was a very kind-hearted man. He was rather short-tempered too, but his anger never lasted long. He was not very tall or strong, and he was not highly educated. But he had a natural cleverness and intelligence. He was especially fond of horses and used to ride a great deal, and he had talent for choosing good horses and for healing them when they were sick. My mother is a kind and loving person. She feels for everyone. She will gladly give her own meal to a hungry person and go hungry herself. Yet although she is so gentle, she always ruled the family. She is so adaptable and farsighted. The life of our family was simple, but it was happy and content. Our family was large, for I have 2 sisters and 4 brothers, and we are widely spread in age. My mother gave birth to 16 children, but 9 of them died when they were very young. The whole family was linked together by the strongest bonds of love and kindness.
Seven billion human beings on this planet, mentally, emotionally, physically, same. we all have the same potential to create happy life or miserable life. You know, for a happy life and difficult life, ultimately related with our mind, our emotion. So when we facing some problem, emotional level, then we really feel desperate. So we have the potential, you see, to create inner peace. With inner peace, when we face some problem, we can keep peace of mind as a human being. Now some scientists say basic human nature is more compassionate. Logically, you see, we are social animal. So our life, beginning of our life, very much depend on mother's compassion, kind, loving kindness. Without that, we can't survive. So other animal also, you see, those social animal, individuals' sort of survival depend on rest of the community. So we also social animal. So therefore, the mental level, which thinking or thought or emotion bring together, that's human compassion. So since we are social animal, so compassion is part of our life. Now the problem existing our education, not talking about these inner value. That's a mistake. So I always see it expressing from kindergarten level up to university level, see the subject which, you know, the hygiene of physical. Beside that, we should include hygiene of emotion. So therefore, we should think more seriously. Education field, modern education, very much oriented about material value. So that's not adequate. Now today's world, we can see a lot of problems. Essentially, we are human beings ourselves created.
Compassion naturally creates a positive atmosphere, and as a result, you feel more peaceful and content. Anger and hatred are the greatest obstacles to compassion.
The greatest degree of inner tranquility comes from the development of love and compassion. They open our inner lives, reducing stress, distrust, and loneliness.
Compassion can be roughly defined in terms of a state of mind that is nonviolent, non-harming, and non-aggressive. It is a mental attitude based on the wish for others to be free of their suffering and is associated with a sense of commitment, responsibility, and respect towards others.
The foundation of the Buddha's teachings lies in compassion, and the reason for practicing the teachings is to wipe out the persistence of ego, the number one enemy of compassion.
Compassion is a mind wishing that sentient beings be free from suffering, and loving kindness is mind wishing then they meet with happiness.
One of the parrots was very friendly with Master of Robes. He used to feed it nuts as it nibbled from his fingers. He used to stroke its head, at which the bird appeared to enter a state of ecstasy. I very much wanted this kind of friendliness, and several times tried to get a similar response, but to no avail. So I took a stick to punish it. Of course, thereafter it fled at the sight of me. This was a very good lesson in how to make friends, not by force, by compassion.
Compassion and generosity are not just lofty virtues. They are at the center of our humanity, what makes our lives joyful and meaningful.
quest for enlightenment. My education began when I was 6, and I was taught entirely by the traditional system of Tibet. The basic purpose of the Tibetan system is to broaden and cultivate the mind by a variety of knowledge. My religious education in dialectic discussion began in earnest when I was 12. I will confess that when I was introduced to metaphysics and philosophy soon after I was 13, they unnerved me so that I had this feeling of being dazed, as though I had been hit on the head by a stone. But that phase did not linger beyond the first few days, and after that, the new studies became simpler and clearer. Nothing remains difficult once you get used to it, an Indian seer has said, and I certainly found this was so in my education. One by one, other subjects were added to my curriculum. And as I went on, I found less and less difficulty in learning all that I was required of me. In fact, I began to feel a growing inquisitiveness to know more and more. My interest reached beyond my allotted studies, and I found satisfaction in reading advanced chapters of the books and wanting to know from my teachers more than I was supposed to at my age. This increase in one's intellectual powers is associated with spiritual development. At each stage of my learning, I received consecration of the mind and body in preparation for the higher doctrines. I had the first of these teachings when I was 8, and I still remember it vividly, and the feeling of peace and happiness that it brought me. At each of the later ceremonies, I could feel the spiritual experience which has always been associated with them. My belief and faith in my religion became deeper. The assurance in my mind that I was following the right path became firmer. I felt an immense debt to those teachers, mostly Indian, who had given Tibetans their invaluable religious doctrines, and to those Tibetan scholars who interpreted and preserved them in our language. I began to think less of myself and more of others, and became aware of the concept of compassion. When I was 24, I took the preliminary examination at each of the 3 great monastic universities in Tibet. These examinations are always in the form of congregational debates. The rules of procedure are simple but dignified. Each student has to face a large number of opponents who choose whatever subject and whatever disputable point they think necessary to defeat their adversary. And all the standard works of Indian and Tibetan scholars, as well as the Lord Buddha's words embodied in the sutras, are quoted to refute the contentions of the opposing party. I had to compete with 15 learned scholars at each university. Then I had to stand before 2 erudite abbots and initiate a dialectic discussion. A year later, I appeared for my final examination during the annual Mölam festival in Tibet, a festival in which many thousands of monks come into the city to attend. At each session, hundreds of learned lamas in their brilliant red and yellow robes, my own 2 tutors anxiously among them, sat around eagerly and critically listening. I found these examinations extremely difficult because I had to concentrate so hard on the subject. Several hours of debate seemed like an instant. Of course, I was proud and happy to be taking the final examination to receive the degree of Master of Metaphysics after so many years of studying the great teachings of the Lord Buddha. But I knew that there is really no end to one's need for continual learning until one can reach the higher stages of spiritual attainment. The kindness of my teachers will always remain with me as a memory that I shall cherish. They gave me the religious knowledge which has always been and will always be my greatest comfort and inspiration. But I know that I grew up with hardly any knowledge of worldly affairs, and it was in that state that I was called upon to lead my country against the invasion of communist China.
So as I mentioned earlier, basic human nature is more compassionate. And of course, including insects, animals want peace, do not want suffering. And we human beings naturally want peace, happiness. But a lot of problem we created. Why? Too much destructive emotion. And firstly, we say the strong sort of also the emphasis, we and they. And ultimately, me, me, me. So self-centered attitude is against basic human nature as a social animal. So individual survival entirely depend on the community. So therefore, we have to pay more attention, taking care about other. That's what we usually say, altruism, compassion, ningji, compassion. That not only is nice to other, but also, you see, your mind become very peaceful. Because logically, real destroyer of our peace of mind is anger, jealousy, fear. These are the destroyer of peace of mind. So the opposite of these emotions is compassion. Take care about other. So, besides religious talking, according to scientific sort of view, firstly, we are social animal. Therefore, our basic nature is more compassionate. So now in education, we should pay some attention about how to develop peace of mind. In order to do that, we need more information about the system of our emotion, our mind. That's lacking. Modern society, that's lacking. When some problem face, say, because lack of sort of knowledge how to tackle our fear, our worry, our anxiety, then we rely on drugs, alcohol. Then worst thing is suicide. So, whether, as I mentioned earlier, whether believer or non-believer, the knowledge about our mind and how to tackle our destructive emotion. These are academic subjects, subject for health, and subject for happy family, happy individual, then happy community.
A truly compassionate attitude towards others does not change even if they behave negatively or hurt you.
If we stress secondary level of differences, my nation, my religion, my color, then we notice the differences. When we relate to others from the place of compassion, it goes to the first level, the human level, not the secondary level of difference. Then you can even have compassion on your enemy.
Every single being, even those who are hostile to us, is just as afraid of suffering as we are and seeks happiness in the same way we do. Every person has the same right as we do to be happy and not to suffer. So let's take care of others wholeheartedly, of both our friends and enemies. This is the basis of true compassion.
If we are content just to think that compassion, rationality, and patience are good, that is not actually enough to develop these qualities. Difficulties provide the occasion to put them into practice. Who can make such occasions arise? Certainly not our friends, but rather our enemies, for they are the ones who pose the most problems. So that if we truly want to progress on the path, we must regard our enemies as our best teachers.
You must not hate those who do wrong or harmful things, but with compassion you must do what you can to stop them, for they are harming themselves, as well as those who suffer from their actions.
He told me that while he was in a Chinese communist gulag for almost 18 years, he faced danger on a few occasions. I thought he was referencing a threat to his own life, but when I asked, "What danger?" he answered, "Losing compassion toward the Chinese."
Genuine compassion is based on the rationale that all human beings have an innate desire to be happy and overcome suffering, just like myself. With this foundation, you can feel compassion regardless of whether you view the other person as friend or an enemy. It is based on the other's fundamental rights rather than your own mental projection. Upon this basis, then, you will generate love and compassion. That's genuine compassion.
Chinese invasion of Tibet. In October 1950, our worst fears were fulfilled. News reached Lhasa that an army of 80,000 soldiers of the People's Liberation Army had crossed the Dichu River east of Chamdo. Reports on Chinese radio announced that on the anniversary of the communists coming to power in China, the peaceful liberation of Tibet had begun. So the axe had fallen, and soon Lhasa must fall. We could not possibly resist such an onslaught. In addition to the shortage of manpower, the Tibetan army suffered from having few modern weapons and almost no training. There were two schools of thought. One consisted of people who looked to me for leadership in this crisis. The other of people who felt I was still too young for such responsibility. I agreed with the latter, but unfortunately, I was not consulted. A month ago, I had been a carefree young man, eagerly looking forward to the annual opera festival. Now, I was faced with the immediate prospect of leading my country as it prepared for war. It was extraordinary to what lengths the Chinese authorities went to provide a facade behind which they would carry out their abominations elsewhere in the country. I felt powerless. Yet, I was certain that if I resigned or opposed the Chinese directly, the consequences would be devastating. And I could not allow Lhasa and those areas of Tibet that were not so and far engulfed in bloodshed to succumb as well. The fighting throughout Kham and Amdo, and now central Tibet, continued to gain momentum. Several tens of thousands of freedom fighters had joined forces and were pressing raids closer and closer to Lhasa, despite being poorly supplied with arms and ammunition. In Lhasa, thousands of refugees from Chinese atrocities outside Lhasa had arrived and were bivouacked on its outskirts. Slowly, from the reports of refugees, we began to receive a clearer impression of the terrible things that were happening in the east and northeast of Tibet. The Chinese were using artillery and bomber aircraft, not only against the guerrillas, but also against the villages and monasteries whose people they suspected of helping them. Villages and monasteries were being totally destroyed. Lamas and lay leaders were being humiliated, imprisoned, killed, and tortured. Land was confiscated. Sacred images, books of scriptures, and other things of holy significance to us were broken up, derided, or simply stolen. If the Chinese had ever wanted to win over Tibetans as willing citizens of their motherland, they had evidently given up the attempt. Tibetans could never be awed or terrified into acquiescence. And to attack our religion, our most precious possession, was a lunatic policy. Of course, I protested very strongly to the Chinese general in Lhasa against these shocking tactics, but it continued on. In Lhasa, we had reached a breaking point. The breach between the Chinese and my cabinet was already open. The Chinese were arming their civilians and reinforcing their barricades in the city. General Tan Guan-sen, addressing a women's meeting in Lhasa, said that where there is rotten meat, the flies gathered. But if you got rid of the meat, the flies were no more trouble. The flies, I suppose, were the Tibetan guerrilla fighters, and the rotten meat was either my cabinet or myself. And then, either by accident or design, the Chinese brought the final crisis on us in March 1959, leading to my escape to India and the beginning of my life as a refugee.
Now today's world, East depend West, West depend East, similarly North, South. So whole 7 billion human beings, almost like one human community. So now we really educate people, sense of oneness of 7 billion human beings. We have to live together. I think we have to develop child's mind. Student, child, they don't care what others' religion, what others' nationality. So long, play together, the same. We, elder people, we sometimes say too much emphasis, what is their religion, what is their nationality, then creates the strong feeling of we and they. That's the source of problem. So we need a sense of oneness of 7 billion human beings. Is very important. I always consider myself one of the 7 billion human beings. I believe each 7 billion human being have the responsibility, moral responsibility, to create happy humanity. Not talking about next life, just this life. So therefore, the 7 billion human beings have the responsibility to create a more compassionate world. Now today's world,
by simply shifting my focus to another person, which is what compassion does, my own pain was much less intense. This is how compassion works, even at the physical level. Compassion brings inner peace, and whatever else is going on, that peace of mind allows us to see the whole picture more clearly.
The basic sources of happiness are a good heart, compassion, and love. If we have these, even if we're surrounded by hostility, we'll feel little disturbance.
When something needs to be done in the world to rectify the wrongs, if one is really concerned with benefiting others, one needs to be engaged, involved. This is an action out of compassion.
And I think some suffering, maybe even intense suffering, is a necessary ingredient for life, certainly for developing compassion.
More dangerous than guns or bombs are hatred, lack of compassion, and lack of respect for the rights of others. As long as hatred dwells in the human mind, real peace is impossible.
Freedom in exile. There was nothing dramatic about our crossing of the frontier. The country was equally wild on each side of it and uninhabited. I saw it in a daze of sickness and weariness and unhappiness deeper than I can express. We must have been a pitiful sight to the handful of Indian guards that met us at the border. 80 travelers, physically exhausted and mentally wretched from our ordeal. We finally reached some 3 weeks after leaving Lhasa, though it seemed like an aeon. But nobody could have remained quite despondent after the sympathy I received as soon as we reached the first villages and towns in India. As we arrived in Tezpur, I was astonished and quite overwhelmed to find thousands of telegrams of good wishes and about 100 journalists and photographers representing newspapers all around the world who had come to that remote place to meet me and hear what they called the story of the year. In India, I really saw for the first time the true meaning of the word democracy. The Indian government issued a communique saying that it did not recognize the Dalai Lama's government in exile, but it did nothing to try to prevent me from expressing it, much less from holding it. Likewise, there was no interference from New Delhi over how I and the growing number of Tibetans conducted our lives. In accordance with popular requests, I'd begun to give weekly audiences. This gave me an opportunity to meet a variety of people and tell them about the situation in Tibet. In addition to reducing formality, our tragedy also gave me the opportunity to greatly simplify my own personal life. In Lhasa, I had many possessions which were of little use, but it was very difficult to give them away. Now, I possessed almost nothing, and I found it much easier to pass on things that were given to me if they could be of benefit and use to my fellow refugees. Given our situation, I realized that it was necessary to think in terms of settling semi-permanently in India. Only then would it be possible to begin an education program and take steps to ensure the cultural continuity of the Tibetan people. With this consideration, I gratefully accepted land offered by the Indian government in South India with the eventual aim to re-establish a community in exile. I was able to open the first nursery for Tibetan refugee children soon after arriving in Dharamsala. I appointed my elder sister, Tsering Doma, to run it. Today, the nursery thrives as part of the Tibetan Children's Village in Dharamsala under the care of my younger sister, Jitsun Pema. Throughout 1960, I continued to work at reforming the Tibetan administration. And together with the cabinet, I began the difficult process of full democratization. On September 2nd, 1960, I inaugurated the Commission of Tibetan People's Deputies, the highest legislative body of the government, which was now open to freely elected representation in exile. In September 2001, in a further step towards democratization, we began electing the Kalunchipa chairman of the cabinet, thus ending the custom by which Dalai Lama held temporal as well as spiritual authority in Tibet. This was also the first time in Tibet's long history that the people had directly elected their political leader. In 2011, on my own initiative, happily and with pride, ended the dual authority of the Dalai Lama. I made the final decision that the leadership democratically elected by the Tibetan people should take over the complete political responsibilities of Tibet. These changes will make our administration more stable and excel its development. I also encouraged women to take part in government. I reminded people that selection for important positions should never be on the question of gender, only on the quality and the aptitude of the candidate. In 1963, I called a meeting of all the heads of the different traditions of Buddhism. Together, we discussed our common difficulties and strategies for overcoming them in order to preserve and propagate our Buddhist culture. I was satisfied that if we could only provide ourselves with the right facilities, our religion would survive. And soon, after re-establishing my own Namgyal monastery, I re-established the three great monastic universities of Ganden, Debong, and Sera in South India, initially with a complement of 1,300 monks only. So far, we have preserved the Dharma well.
I'm one of the human beings, so my sort of commitment, number one commitment is, as a human being, try to promote deeper human value. That's human compassion. And that based on sense of oneness of 7 billion human beings. Then second, I'm Buddhist. So then today's world, religion itself now creating more division and worse thing, killing each other in the name of different religious tradition. For example, in Egypt, Christian-Muslim problem. In Muslim world, Shia-Sunni problem. Unfortunately, Bangladesh, Buddhist-Muslim problem. So this is unthinkable. Religion, all major religious tradition carry same message, message of love, message of compassion and forgiveness, tolerance. Yet, religion use more division, killing. So, I am believer, I am Buddhist. One of my commitment is try to create religious harmony. So it is possible. Look, India, 1,000 years, different religious traditions live together. For example, in India, among the Muslim, I never heard a problem Shia and Sunni. So therefore, religious harmony is possible. India, big nation. There are a lot of complicated sort of society. Yet, as far as religious harmony is concerned, I think India is the example. Different religious faith can live together and mutual respect. So therefore, I am convinced we can develop religious harmony on global level. So that's my number 2 commitment. Then third, I am Tibetan. You see, Tibetan trusted me. So then also, you see, one of my friend, Chinese ecologist, he described Tibetan plateau is third pole. Reason the global warming, the effect from Tibetan plateau is as much as South Pole and the North Pole. So he described Tibetan plateau is third pole. So now the climate quite, I think, seriously changing, global warming. So look, Mongolia, now much less snow. So many animals, you see, suffer and dying. And Tibet also. So therefore, now gradually, Tibet, usually I describe the supplier of water to India and Bangladesh and Pakistan, and China also as well, some extent, like Yellow River. So therefore, preservation of Tibetan ecology, I feel very important.
Compassion is the radicalism of our time.
We can reject everything else. Religion, ideology, all receive wisdom. But we cannot escape the necessity of love and compassion. This, then, is my true religion, my simple faith.
Compassion, what I sometimes also call human affection, is the determining factor of our life. Connected to the palm of the hand, the 5 fingers become functional. Cut off from it, they are useless. Similarly, every human action becomes dangerous when it is deprived of human feeling. When they are performed with feeling and respect for human values, all activities become constructive.
Ultimately, humanity is one, and this small planet is our only home. If we are to protect this home of ours, each of us needs to experience a vivid sense of universal altruism and compassion.
Living in society, we must share the suffering of our fellow citizens and practice compassion and tolerance, not only toward our loved ones, but also toward our enemies.
It is clear that the only way to truly change our world is through teaching compassion.
May Tibet become free and zone of peace. May all be kind to each other. May Tibet become free and zone of peace.
Future of compassion in our world. Following my visits to America in 1979, 1981, and 1984, many people in this country expressed a desire to do something for Tibet. As a direct result, in July 1985, 91 members of the United States Congress signed a letter to the then president of the People's Assembly in Beijing, Li Xianin, expressing support for direct talks between the Chinese government and my representatives. For the first time, Tibet had formal political support, something I took as an encouraging sign that the justice of our cause was finally beginning to be recognized internationally. Further evidence of this was a surge of interest among people in other countries who started to take similar steps. In early 1987, I received an invitation to address the Human Rights Caucus of the United States Congress in Washington, D.C. I delivered my address on Capitol Hill on 21st September 1987. The proposal that I outlined has since become known as the 5-Point Peace Plan, which included, number 1, transformation of the whole of Tibet into a zone of ahimsa, demilitarized zone of peace and nonviolence. Number 2, abandonment of China's population transfer policy, which threatened the very existence of Tibetans as a people. Number 3, respect for the Tibetan people's fundamental human rights and democratic freedoms. Number 4, restoration of and protection of Tibet's natural environment and abandonment of China's use of Tibet for the production of nuclear weapons and dumping of nuclear waste. Number 5, commencement of earnest negotiations on the future status of Tibet and of relations between Tibetan and Chinese people. In general terms, my proposal was for the whole of Tibet to be transformed into a zone of ahimsa, an Indian term meaning a state of peace and nonviolence, which is in keeping with Tibet's position as a peaceful Buddhist nation. A few days after I'd spoken in Washington, there came reports of huge demonstrations in Lhasa. I later discovered that the demonstrations followed directly Beijing's denunciation of my 5-Point Peace Plan. Thousands of Tibetans turned out in Lhasa calling for a restoration of Tibetan independence. Predictably, the Chinese reacted with violence and cruelty. Armed police moved in to break up the demonstrations, opening fire indiscriminately. News of the demonstrations and the merciless and bloody crackdown flashed around the world, and for the first time since 1959, Tibet was headline news. Following this, in autumn of 1989, during a visit to the United States, I learned that I had won the Nobel Prize for Peace. Although the news did not matter much to me personally, I realized it would mean a great deal to the people of Tibet, for it was they who were the real winners of the prize. My own satisfaction derived from what I saw as international recognition for the value of compassion, forgiveness, and love. Moreover, I was pleased that at that moment, the people of many countries were discovering for themselves that peaceful change was not impossible. In the past, the idea of nonviolent revolution had seemed perhaps idealistic, and I drew great comfort from this overwhelming proof to the contrary. I had direct experience of that truth right at the end of 1989, when I visited Berlin on the very day that Egon Krenz was toppled. Thanks to the cooperation of the East German authorities, I was able to go to the wall itself. As I stood there, in the full view of a still manned security post, an old lady silently handed me a red candle. With some emotion, I lit it and held it up. For a moment, the tiny dancing flame threatened to go out, but it held. And while a crowd pressed around me, touching my hands, I prayed that the light of compassion and awareness would fill the world and dispel the darkness of fear and oppression. It was a moment I shall always remember. Something similar happened when I went to Czechoslovakia a few weeks later as the guest of President Havel, who, fresh from a jail sentence for his political activities, was now president of his country. On arrival, I was greeted by an emotional crowd. Many people had tears in their eyes as they waved and gave the victory sign. And I saw at once that despite the years of totalitarianism, these men and women were full of life and exultant in their newly won freedom. I felt greatly honored to be invited to Czechoslovakia, not only by a head of state for the first time, but also by a man who had consistently shown such devotion to truth. Another person I met in early 1990 who made a vivid impression on me was Baba Amte, a man who founded a village in southern India. Baba Amte is an extraordinary man. He is himself virtually a cripple because of damage to his spine. He can only stand straight or lie down. Yet, he remains so full of energy that I could not do his work even though I am fitter. As I sat on his bed, holding his hand, and he lay talking to me, I could not help feeling that here was someone who was truly compassionate, who had made a decision to dedicate his life to helping others. Such examples of humanity give me the conviction that one day there will be an end to my people's suffering at the hands of the People's Republic of China. For there are more than 1 billion Chinese, and whilst maybe several thousand are participating in acts of cruelty at any moment, I believe that there must be several million performing acts of kindness.
I'm mainly concerned, firstly, ecology, secondly, Tibetan culture, knowledge. Now, 84-year-old person, I notice, you see, among the humanity, particularly among the Buddhist, the Nalanda tradition, not just religion, but academic, so psychology, and logic, and physics, including quantum physics. Now, these things, in ancient Indian tradition, over 1,000 years, they made a Nalanda tradition. You see, have these sort of very complicated philosophy or knowledge about mind, or as I mentioned earlier, the psychology, logic, and physics, particularly quantum physics. You see these things. So therefore, today, according to Nalanda tradition, we can learn from modern science and mutual learning. Number of scientists is really showing interest about those subjects, psychology or physics, particularly quantum physics. You see, many scientists really showing interest to learn from our knowledge, which come from a Nalanda tradition. Therefore, firstly, religious harmony, very important. Then secondly, as Tibetan, so my main concern is preservation of those our knowledge which come from Nalanda. That's, I think, it is something universal value. Like quantum physics, very good. So in Nalanda tradition, it's very thoroughly investigate what's the reality. Nothing exists as appears. There is big differences, reality and appearances. These, the Nalanda masters, over 2,000 years ago, already made very clear. One my Indian physicist, he once told me, quantum physics in the West, something new. But in this country, in India, 2,000 years ago, already developed the concept of quantum physics. It's very true. So therefore, the knowledge which we kept over 1,000 years, I feel it can be useful, considered as an academic subject. So that's my third, commitment. Like that. So here, my friend, if you truly love me, then keep in your mind my 3 commitments. And whatever way, you see, wherever you live, try to create compassionate atmosphere, compassionate, atmosphere, compassionate society, then religious harmony. Then, you see, tell more people Tibetan knowledge which come from Nalanda is quite useful. So, whether believer or non-believer, it's worthwhile. This Tibetan knowledge is to keep as a part of academic subject. So, so if you practice, if you pay more attention, that's best gift for my birthday.
When I speak about love and compassion, I do so not as a Buddhist, nor as a Tibetan, nor as the Dalai Lama. I do so as one human being speaking with another. I hope that you, at this moment, will think of yourself as a human being rather than as an American, Asian, European, African, or member of any particular country. These loyalties are secondary. If you and I find common ground as human beings, we will communicate on a basic level.
Something is lacking. As one of the 7 billion human beings, I believe everyone has a responsibility to develop a happier world. We need, ultimately, to have a greater concern for others' well-being. In other words, kindness or compassion, which is lacking now. We must pay more attention to our inner values. We must look inside.
So, let us reflect on what is truly of value in life, what gives meaning to our lives, and set our priorities on the basis of that. The purpose of our life needs to be positive. We weren't born with the purpose of causing trouble or harming others. For our life to be of value, I think we must develop basic good human qualities such as warmth, kindness, and compassion. Then our life becomes more meaningful, more peaceful, and happier.
A good motivation is what is needed. Compassion without dogmatism, without complicated philosophy, just understanding that others are human brothers and sisters and respecting their human rights and dignities. That we humans can help each other is one of our unique human capacities.
When you are caring, compassionate, more concerned about the welfare of others than about your own, wonderfully, wonderfully, you suddenly feel a warm glow in your heart because you have, in fact, wiped the tears from the eyes of another.
It is clear that something is seriously lacking in the way we human beings are going about things. But what is that lack? The fundamental problem, I believe, is that at every level we are giving too much attention to the external, material aspects of life while neglecting moral ethics and inner values. By inner values, I mean the qualities that we all appreciate in others and that toward which we all have a natural instinct, bequeathed by our biological nature as animals that survive and thrive only in an environment of concern, affection, and warm-heartedness, or in a single word, compassion. The essence of compassion is a desire to alleviate the suffering of others, and to promote their well-being. This is the spiritual principle from which all other positive inner values emerge.
Om Mani Padme Hum. 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 Om Mani Padme.
So that I want to share. And then I'm now 84-year-old, but my physical, okay. So recently I got some serious illness. Now, week by week, now improving. The important thing is my mind, my brain, quite sharp. So in any way, I determined to live around 100 years, as much as I can serve humanity, irrespective of what religious belief, or believer or non-believer. So as a practitioner, my body, speech, and mind dedicated well-being of other. So that way of thinking, you see, some sort of benefit to other and to myself. You see, immense benefit. So that much I want to share with you. So you show me your love, your friendly attitude. So that's my gift for you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Perhaps see you again next year. And I think at least the next 1 decade, 2 decades, I will live. So we can see. Thank you. Bye-bye.